I am a simple man. When Wikipedia says something, I believe it.
Can I talk my shit again? Can I talk my shit?
Wikipedia says Baldur's Gate 3 is an RPG, which makes sense. It's a game where you create your own custom character, decide whether they will make sweet love to an animal, and choose how they will shape the world around them. Clearly, this is a role-playing game. Elden Ring is an RPG. In this one, you also get to make character creation and skill progression decisions, but that's about it. Other than the weapons you choose to use or clothes you wear, all playthroughs aren't profoundly different. So, where is the role-playing? Well, I'm not sure actually. Yes, you can make yourself look like a perfect Hyperborean specimen, but where do you actually play the role of him? Well, if you talk to different NPCs, you'll get a slightly different ending cutscene. Does that make it an RPG? The Mortal Kombat games also have multiple endings, so it cannot be that. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, what we call a Japanese role-playing game, you do not get to create nor customize your character, nor make any real decisions other than the sword you hold and the skills you increase. By role-playing, they must of course mean watch this character that you did not create make all his own decisions and act out a story that you cannot have any input on. Maybe life is just profoundly different in Japan. Risk of Rain 2 is also called an RPG, and in that game you do literally nothing but fight a variety of lizards and robots. In fact, it seems to me that very few role-playing games have much role-playing in them at all. Which is confusing. Perhaps do I just not know what role-playing means? I am not black, and yet in chess I can play a legion of black troops, but I wouldn't call chess a role-playing game. Clearly, there is a line between what can be considered roleplay and what is not, but where does it lie? Wikipedia says role-playing is changing of one's behavior to assume a role, either unconsciously to fill out a social role or consciously to act out an adopted role. But it is obviously the case that games where you do specifically that are not very often considered role-playing games. For example, in Red Dead Redemption 2, the player is made to play the role of a person living in the Old West, very directly deciding the kinds of activities that the character Arthur will partake in and the kind of person he will be, with these decisions having an impact on the world and the story. And yet, it is called an action-adventure game, not an RPG. In Minecraft, the player plays the role of a sole human, where they are granted full control over how to uniquely spend his days while he endures the psychological nightmare of roaming alone in a world devoid of all intelligent life except these long-nosed freaks and a litany of different ghouls. In this horrible world, you may choose to mine, build, or even find God, and yet, the way we uniquely choose to play this role does not a role-playing game make. It is a sandbox, not an RPG. In American Truck Simulator, the player plays the role of an American trucker, deciding which old man he will look like, the name of his company, the truck he drives, the sights he'll see, even the time he goes to bed. All parts of this man's life and his story are played out by the player, but this game is called a simulator, not an RPG. Do you mean to tell me that playing out the quiet melancholy of a trucker humming low on a lonesome stretch near Vegas, Lord, you gave me nothing, and you took it all away, isn't role-playing? This only becomes more confusing when you look at how people attempt to define the characteristics of a role-playing video game. So let's do that. Gaming researchers Jose Zagal and Sebastian Deterding, in their article Definitions of Role-Playing Games, submit this fairly extensive list of characteristics of role-playing video games that end up applying to pretty much every modern game with combat and a narrative. Such as, the game is played over multiple sessions. Player characters improve over time via systems for progression. In-game events are usually guided along a pre-planned plot, but players may play open-endedly, and so on. I understand that this is supposed to be a sort of big tent definition that could capture every role-playing video game, but most games that are not called role-playing games also have most, if not all, of these things. What about industry expert Timothy Kane, a lead developer on the original Fallout, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, some really important and foundational role-playing video games? Well, in a video on the subject, he submits that a role-playing video game should have roughly all of these things, and the less they have of them, the less they are a role-playing game. Essentially, the list boils down to the idea that the player should have immense control over the character they play, their innate traits, the way they behave, and all the ways they can impact the world. But now, we're falling into an opposite sort of issue. The two most popular role-playing game franchises of all time, those being Pokemon and Final Fantasy, provide the player almost zero agency in character creation and narrative control. Ostensibly, Timothy would say that they are not RPGs, and games like Red Dead Redemption 2 would have a far greater claim. But obviously, this is not how it works. How would you define a role-playing game? I could go on and on finding different definitions where people put forward that role-playing games ought to have some amount of role-playing, or maybe even none at all, but clearly this is going nowhere. It is clear that there is more role-playing in these games than there is in, for example, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and yet we seem to have agreed that this is a role-playing game, and they are not. Well, worry not, for there is unfortunately an obvious answer why, and it can be explained by Balatro. Balatro is an RPG. Do you do any role-playing in it? No, not even remotely, but as you'll come to find out, that is irrelevant. Balatro is what is called a roguelike, a genre of game characterized by randomness and starting over. The genre is most easily described by the game after which it is named. Rogue. In Rogue, you play an adventurer exploring a dungeon. In this dungeon, you will find both enemies and treasure. However, importantly, these are both random. Every chamber in the dungeon is randomly generated, such that no two dungeons will be alike. This game also features permanent character death, meaning every time you die, restart, or finish, you will retain nothing from previous games. Except, of course, your unwashable guilt. Therefore, every run is completely separate from the last. You will fight different monsters, you will acquire different items, and when you die, you will never see them again. It is this gameplay loop that makes a game a roguelike. If your game, like Balatro, features this randomly generated set of challenges where all progress is lost upon your failure or its completion, then it is a roguelike. And roguelikes happen to be considered role-playing games. Why? There is no role-playing here, because Rogue is based on traditional role-playing games, specifically dungeon crawlers. These are tabletop games like D&D where a party of people would explore a dungeon, typically in a fantasy setting, using characters of their own creation. In these games, all the gameplay decisions are adjudicated by player choices. The enemies and loot encountered are decided by a referee, often called a dungeon master, and the outcomes of things like combat are decided by dice rolls. Rogue was just an attempt to bring this kind of gameplay into a digital setting where all of the complicated mathematics and dice rolls of the game would be quickly resolved by a computer, and the decisions of the dungeon master, like enemies and loot, instead being generated randomly. It is for this reason that the role-playing and role-playing video games doesn't really matter, for they have never been attempts to make games where you roleplay specifically. They are just imitating the primary design features of role-playing games, things like party structures, skills, leveling progression, treasure, goblins, and so on. And if role-playing doesn't happen to be one of those features that makes the cut, then whatever, it still emulates most of a traditional role-playing game. In fact, in the communities of many older tabletop games, there were crowds of people who didn't really care for the role-playing part. They mainly enjoyed the gameplay. And so, in this way, it's hard to say that role-playing is even a necessary part of the very first games that were called role-playing games. This is why Final Fantasy VII Remake is a role-playing game. It is a newborn installment in an unbroken lineage of games with a party system, leveling, progression, relatively turn-based combat, outcomes decided by dice rolls, and so on. All things that come directly from games like Dungeons & Dragons. And it is just so with Elden Ring, Skyrim, Baldur's Gate, and so on. It's never been about the role-playing, it's about the features that role-playing games have. You could argue it's almost purposely not about the role-playing. The computer is there to replace the dungeon master, the person who makes the story and allows you to freely decide how your character will behave. Because we do not have the technology to allow you to do whatever you want in a narratively compelling way, all of the aforementioned games have a pre-made story with predetermined outcomes and relatively no real player choice, specifically so that you can have a high-quality story alongside gameplay similar to that which you'd find in games like D&D. The fact that you can't roleplay is essentially the computer being a good dungeon master and forcing you to take part in an enjoyable narrative that you cannot fuck up. Here is something interesting that has been occurring recently that backs this up. The Assassin's Creed games have long been considered action-adventure games, up until recently where some of the contemporary titles have been being called action role-playing games. Is it because they added a suite of new role-playing features? No, of course not. It's because they added skill progression, they added the ability to find and upgrade gear, they added critical damage rolls, and so on. All just combat mechanics you'd find in a traditional role-playing game. And conversely, Red Dead Redemption 2 has more role-playing than any other Rockstar game that came before it. It is perhaps one of the most immersive role-playing experiences in modern gaming. But it is not a role-playing game, for it shares no lineage of design with traditional role-playing games. So what is the point of this video? The point of this video is that I find this all stupid and upsetting. I enjoy role-playing in video games. I like to be immersed in a character and live out their life. And seemingly a lot of other people do too. GTA Online is currently one of the most popular games in the world and has maintained its prominence even all these years after its release, in large part due to its massive and freakish role-playing community. In 2020, Minecraft saw a massive uptick in its popularity following the success of the Dream SMP, a multimedia content creation server that was essentially just a bunch of people, if we can even call them that, role-playing. Much the same can be said about Roblox, Gmod, even games like Hearts of Iron. And it's because, in some way, all of these games can be considered sandboxes, places where you are able to freely dictate the life of the character you choose to play. In this way, they are effectively the exact opposite of the modern RPG, where in the average role-playing video game, a computer does the hard work of telling a good story while allowing you to handle your skill progression. In these games, it's the opposite. The gameplay tools are simple, they handle themselves, allowing you to focus on building the story. So what should we make of all this? Not much. I guess my point boils down to the fact that the RPG genre is misnamed and maybe should be called skill-based progression games or something like that, but that is just semantics. Arguing over what thing fits into what genre is a problem that exists in all art forms and will not be resolved because God does not care about things like this. That is all. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you didn't, maybe you can take some notes from this video and roleplay as though you did. A heartfelt thanks to all the individuals who liked, commented, and subscribed following my last video. Your support is very gracious. If you are new, and you probably are, I have 5 other videos you can watch if this one tickled your fancy. Each one as terrifying as the last. More to come. See you.